everybody, and welcome to the channel. This is episode 2 of the van build series where we go into the bodywork. We started out by fixing the sliding door. There was a huge dent in the bottom and we needed to drill a couple holes in it and pull it back to being flat. After drilling a few holes and pulling it tight with bolts, it was close enough where we could fill the rest with Bondo and get it ready for paint. Bondo adheres best to bare metal, so we stripped all the paint off the door in the areas where we did all the straightening. The other thing we did is removed all the badging off of the van. So we scraped off everywhere where it said Sprinter or Dodge or anything of that nature. We also removed the reflectors that were on the side, and when we pulled them off we realized that there was actually a hole in the body there. So we took a metal plate and welded it behind it and then filled it over with Bondo later. We began the process of welding up the holes that we had drilled in the door earlier. There were several that we used to pull the massive dent out of the bottom. Then we welded up the reflectors that were on the bottom by holding a plate behind them and tacking it in, and then finish welding it solid. Then we realized that we should probably strengthen up the door a little bit more as we were sanding on it and getting it ready for Bondo. You could feel the door move as you pushed it, and the panel itself was flexing. So what we did is welded the inside webbing to the door panel in order to strengthen it up. After all the welding, we had to clean off the spots that had burned through on the outside and get it prepped for Bondo. We used a side grinder with a flapper disc on it to smooth off the places where we'd actually welded on the outside where the bolt holes went through. And here you can see where we did the reinforcements on the inside. There's burn marks down the side where we kind of burned through the paint, but basically we just attached that entire inner section of the door to the outer section. And then we started with the Bondo, and it took layer after layer after layer to build up the areas and get them where they needed to be. So basically you put a layer on and then you sand that layer with a flat or an inline sander until you can see the high and low spots. And then you put another layer on and go from there. And then once you get to a certain point, then you spray a layer of primer on and sand that. And basically anywhere you punch through the primer, you really need to, that would be a high spot, and you need to fill in the low spots where the primer remains. The back doors on the van were actually in okay condition. There was a couple places where we had to punch through the paint and get rid of some markings. So this is the inline sander, and you can kind of see the process that you go through to get the area that you're trying to work on flat. And you can basically sand a little bit and then check, and you can almost feel the low spots. And the other thing that you try to do too is blend the areas together. So if you have a sharp line where the Bondo stops, you want that to be almost smooth to the touch, so when you do hit it with primer, that everything blends and you can't see the line itself. Because usually if you can't feel it when you spray it with primer, you're not going to be able to see it. All in all, we've used about a gallon of Bondo so far, which when we first got the can of it, we were thinking, man, we'll never go through all of this. But on a vehicle this big, with all the spots that we had to go over, it actually used a good bit. So here basically we're spreading it out as thin as we can spread it, and it's a special tool. It's actually like a rubber spatula basically that you use to put it on, and you can mimic the shape of the body panel that you're trying to repair basically. Then we started the cycle over, where we sanded off all the Bondo that we had put on the day before. And what I'm doing is cleaning out the rain gutter. Basically there's a adhesive in there that seals where the two panels meet together. And then here I'm going up on the roof and basically stripping the entire roof down, because there had been a couple places where it looks like someone had driven the van into somewhere where it didn't quite fit. So there was a good bit of rust up there that we wanted to make sure got covered really well. So we figured we'd put in the time now and strip the entire roof down all the way to either primer or bare metal, so we'd have the best shot at getting all the rust removed and getting it covered up. This process ended up taking way longer than I had expected. I was basically up there for I think about 3 hours just steadily going, and I was using a wire wheel on the end of an angle grinder, and it was still taking that long. So here you can see basically what I was able to remove with the wire wheel on the angle grinder. Like I said, most of it is primer that's left, but there was some bare metal that I got down to, especially in the places where there was rust. When I got to the rear of the van, we had to remove the taillight assembly because it was broken, and also we wanted to be able to paint under it so you wouldn't be able to see any seams where the paint started and stopped. While I was working on the roof, my dad was going around and reapplying more Bondo to the areas that were still low, and then sanding and figuring out if they had been built up to the level that they needed to be built up to. There was also some spots on the roof that needed to be addressed as well, right above the rain gutter. When I made it around to the other side of the van and started working on the rain gutter, I quickly realized that the entire driver's side panel had been replaced. The spot welds had been drilled out and the new panel had been welded in. But what they didn't do is weld every single spot weld. What they did do is covered the entire rain gutter in silicone, and it didn't seal and proceeded to leak into the van. So we got all the silicone taken out and then began sanding the roof and getting it ready for primer. We had to sand everywhere that we had hit with the wire wheel to smooth out the abrasiveness of the wire wheel, because it would have left streaks everywhere and it would have had a really aggressive texture to it that you don't want to see in a paint job. So we got a coat of black primer on the roof, and it laid down really smoothly because of the sanding and covered up all the areas where there was rust. We sprayed everything from the roof rail up and got it ready for a final coat of paint. The next step was to disassemble basically everything on the van that we didn't want to get paint on it. So that includes the grill, the headlights, the windshield washer, fluid attachments, the windshield wiper blades, the grill that was in the hood of the van, the mirrors that were on the side of the van. Really the only thing that we left on the van were the door handles for now, and even those we were going to remove before paint, so you wouldn't have a seam that you would be able to see where the paint stopped basically next to the door handle. We wanted it to be as clean of a paint job as we could possibly do. When we went to remove the windshield washer pass-throughs that allow the fluid to travel from the tank all the way out to the wiper blades, they broke into about 400,000 pieces, so we ended up having to order new ones to replace those. They're just a little small plastic piece that definitely isn't made to ever be removed. The next thing that we worked on getting removed were the side view mirrors. They're held on with 2 bolts that you reach through the inside of the door. We found that out because we first tried to remove the outer mirror from the part that mounts to the door by this bolt that runs basically vertically through the mirror and the one that it rotates around, but you actually don't have to remove that bolt. You can leave the assembly altogether and remove the 2 bolts that hold the entire assembly on. The other tricky part is the wiring harness that is used to move the electric mirrors, if your van has electric mirrors. You have to unhook it and then feed it back through the little hole so you don't have to cut it, basically. The next thing that we had to do is fish the side running light through the passenger front fender. And we wanted to make sure that we would be able to get it back through once we got it out, and it's a very tight area to work in over there. After that, we worked on getting the front driver's side door adjusted. It had been, I think, opened too far and gone past its intended range of travel, which made it where it didn't open or close very smoothly. So in order to adjust it, we had to loosen the top 2 bolts and basically move the door where we needed it to be. But what we found is the top 2 bolts were effectively stripped out. And so when we put a wrench in them and tried to turn them, you couldn't really get the wrench to turn the bolts at all. So we ended up having to drill out those 2 bolts, and then we removed them with a pair of vice grips out the other end once we had drilled the head off of them. And once we got through with that, we were able to actually get the door to be adjusted where we wanted it to. This made it where you didn't have to slam the door and really work on getting it closed when you wanted to close it. Now it closes effortlessly, just like it did when it was new. This process was very tedious and ended up taking far longer than I thought that it would take in order to get the door adjusted. Because when we drilled the bolts out, we ended up having to run a tap back through and clean out the threads where we had boogered them up with the drill. All in all though, having the door shut properly was definitely worth the time. So thanks for watching episode 2 of the van build where we're going through the bodywork. If you have any questions or comments, drop them below. If you liked the video, give us a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more, hit that subscribe button and we'll be back next week with another video.